What's up, everybody? Gary here. Got out the stage lights, kind of excited now. Check this out. This is from last week's UI UX design crash course that we designed in Figma. So if you want to follow along with that portion, then definitely check out the description. There'll be a link to the Figma document. So anyhow, we're going to take that and we're going to make it this. We're going to make it this awesome thing where it works in the browser and we're using no hand coding, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, none of that. We're using the modern approach, the 2026 approach to make this thing work in the browser, on your smartphones, your tablets, and do it in such a way we're not touching code. We're doing it with Cursor, all right? So you're gonna learn how to take this design that we created in Figma and without touching code, learn how multiple ways I'm gonna show you through MCP servers and also just a custom way, and how to get this thing translated to the browser and working almost like pixel perfect. All right, so definitely by the end of this, because this is a crash course, you're gonna be like completely dizzied with a ton of information. So that's perfectly natural. If that's the case, definitely check out, here's the shameless plug, DesignCourse.com, because that is where I have full projects and sprint training coming up where you get to work with me one-on-one. All right, I'll stop the spam. Let's get started. Okay, so once you have this Figma document open from the previous video where we designed this, what I want to do is take this and duplicate it. Control D. And the reason I'm duplicating it is just so I have the original here, because we're going to make some changes to this as we work on the front end development portion. So, okay, the way this works is, you know, the very first thing that I try to concern myself with is the background. Like that's the starting point for me. And then from the background, we move to the nav bar up here, this header portion. And then we'll tackle things as we go from top, bottom, left, right. So the background, you have to ask yourself, is it a solid color? Is it like a pattern background? Is there a photograph in the background? Is there a watermark? Is there like a WebGL Unicorn Studio underlay? If you don't know what that is, you'll find out here in a bit. But that's the one question you have to ask yourself. And you can get the answer in a couple of ways. Visually, obviously. Yeah, there's a gradient here in the background. I'm not sure if you could tell, but it goes from dark to this lighter version to dark again. Down here, this is all one solid color, but up here, pretty much in this selection is a gradient because we're going from one color to another to another. And so if we click on rectangle 20, which I guess we can call backdrop, we'll see if we click on fill, right over here, we have all the information for our gradient. Now, you could communicate this specifically to like Cursor, which is what we're going to be using. But what you could do also is just screenshot the damn thing. So print screen, I have my print screen tool. I'm going to grab that. There we go. And now we're going to switch emphasis real quick or focus to Cursor. Now, Cursor is going to be the tool that I use. Now, the first thing I'll do is we're going to start with a brand new project. So I'm going to click on Open Folder, and then in my Code folder, I'm going to create a new folder. So Control-Shift-N here. I'm just going to call this Form Fit. There we go. Select Folder. And now we have a new instance of Cursor opened up with this folder. Now, if you don't see this sidebar, by the way, Control L is what toggles that on and off. So one of the first questions you also have to ask yourself, you know, before you get into the code portion is, do you want to use a specific framework? Do you want to just have regular straight up HTML and CSS, which is the bare bones way of getting a page up? Well, to answer that question, you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of the project? Well, in this case, this is a marketing landing page. And ultimately, whether or not you need a framework like React or Vue or Angular, there's a bunch of them out there. It depends on the functionality that's going to be required for your project. For us, we could get away with this demo completely just by using vanilla, regular, straight up HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript. That would work just fine because this is an informational page. Now, if you are entertaining the idea of having logins, you know, in user registrations and stuff like that, then it would benefit you to use something like React. So It really just depends on what your use case. And even in that case, if you do have a SaaS, like software as a service, you're building like some type of thing that has users and ordering and all that stuff, you can still have your front end be separated and just have HTML and CSS, and then you create like a subfolder in your project that is based on React. So there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it. But for this simple project, we're just going to simply use straight up HTML, CSS. We're not going to use React. We don't need it for this demo. It would be overkill. So that's the first thing, plan of attack. Understand what technology, what stack you're using. A stack consists of, React would be one part of the stack. You might have MongoDB being your database, or you could use something else. A lot of these tools that go together, that's called your stack. So for us, we're going to start off by directing it to create an index.html, or guess what? We could do it ourselves right over here in the sidebar. We just click right there, and then just type in index.html. And then, you can hit exclamation point, enter. We can get some boilerplate HTML. Now, again, this crash course is all about, kind of front-end development, but doing it in the AI way. But understanding what this stuff is, kind of how it works from a high level, like, what are tags, what are attributes. So the tag is like right here, the red text. Attributes are the orange text. The values are the green text. What is the purpose of the head? Why does it's not self-closing, it closes over here, and then we have these other HTML elements inside of it. Then what's the body? The body is where all your HTML ends up going for your markup, for your structure. Understanding how HTML works is going to make you a more proficient vibe coder or AI-assisted developer. So I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of that right here, but you should definitely understand the basics from a high-level perspective at least. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, let's get rid of that, is just save that. And over here, we're going to go back, and remember, I copied that gradient, right? Control V, that pastes it right up here into the chat context, the chat window. And notice I'm also using Opus 4.5, which at the time of recording this, in my opinion, is just flat out the best model. It's a little bit more expensive compared to some of the other ones, but you will get the best output for it. If you really want to work fast, Grok Code is a lot faster. Okay, so what I'm going to say is I'm just going to riff off the top of my head. I'll pause it, and then we'll go ahead and read the actual prompt, the very first prompt for our project. Okay, so I typed it up. Here is what I specified. It's not very lengthy at all. We're going to create a landing page using regular HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The first step of this process involves specifying a background color and a hero section div element that will contain the navbar in the hero section. Here's what I'm talking about there. I'm going to pause right there. If we go back to Figma, what I'm talking about essentially is a div element, and our div is a HTML element, like a tag. And it's just a generic layout container, essentially. And you can visualize it if I hit the frame tool, or even just a rectangle tool. It doesn't matter. You don't have to do this. It's an invisible element that wraps around your content. And so I'm going to call this the hero section right here. This stuff. Now let me just hide the fill and give it a stroke so we can kind of visualize what this looks like. So this is a div element. This is what we're instructing it to do, which will contain the actual navbar, and then also this stuff, this column here, and then this column here. And I'm going to instruct it, by the way, that we want a max width of about 1600 pixels. You can actually see it's about 1646 pixels right there already. And what that means is when you're dealing with responsive design, meaning like if you're on a desktop computer with a browser and it's stretching, like real far, maybe the person maximized it, maybe it's not maximized, well, then you want everything inside to be able to fluidly expand. But we're going to have a maximum width from which it stops expanding at 1600 pixels. And you'll see how I communicated that in a second. So let me go ahead and just delete that. Going back out right here, the div element needs to have a gradient. All right, so the gradient information has been pasted from Figma. In the background of the color of the website itself, the body element should be a flat background color. Now I left this empty where it says this hash sign. So what that means is, here's how this works. So if I take this backdrop, we can see at the very bottom, we have this color stop right there. That is this one right here. At this point, it is a flat background color, and that background color happens to be 191A20. That's called a hex color code. And that is where I'm going to paste right here. All right. So also the div element that contains the nav bar in hero section should be fluid up until a max width of around 1600 pixels. And I also just realized I needed to add one more paragraph here. There should actually be two div elements. One that contains the background gradient, which is 100% width no matter what. So that background gradient will always go to the very left and right side of the browser or your device that you're viewing it in. And then there's going to be an inner content container that has no background, so it's transparent, but it has that max width of 1600 pixels applied to it. So let's go ahead and see what it does. I will instruct it real quickly just to say, use the existing index.html in this project. All right, so let's hit send and see what it does. Okay, it's done. Let's right click. I'm gonna choose open with live server. And honestly, it's been a long time since I've actually set live server up as an extension. So do your research on there to see if that exists, if that's a menu option inherently in Cursor or not. Okay, so here is the results. I don't see a gradient. So what happens when it comes to, this whole AI assisted development, I don't really want to call this vibe coding, is sometimes there would be unexpected consequences and outcomes. And maybe if you followed along exactly, you have something that might be different from mine because of the non-deterministic nature of LLMs. What that means is sometimes you can enter the same exact input as I did, and you'll get something different. So that's why understanding how to fix these problems and diagnose them is very important. So if I hit Control-Shift-I here in Chrome, this is going to give us access to the Chrome DevTools, which is what this bar is. Your bar may have shown up on the side here. You can dock it to the right or bottom, whatever. Now, what's important is we want to specifically click on this little element right there. And then if I click on this, it just allows me to view the HTML structure as long as I pull this down. Now, you're going to see right here, we have our div class hero gradient. The reason we don't see the gradient, and I knew this is what the case was, is because I failed to specify, let's give this a height so that we can actually see the gradient. The problem is, if I have that selected and we look right up here, which it just went away unfortunately, it says there's a 0 height because there's nothing inside of it yet. We haven't put in the nav bar, we haven't put in the hero section HTML. So it's resulting to 0 for the height, thus we don't see the gradient. So what we can do temporarily, just so we can see if it's working, is right down here. Let's close that. I'll lift this up. With hero gradient specified, or whatever it decided to name it for you, we put an element.style. This is where we can specify some CSS. And so because I understand CSS, I can just quickly type in height, and then I'll type in like 600 pixels, 600 px. Guess what? There is the background gradient. So the background gradient is based on the height of the element from which it's applied. So if I could type in 1000, you can see it makes it even larger. So the height of this gradient, or this element, will dictate where that, how big the actual gradient itself is. Very important to understand, just some basic stuff. Now, if we refresh this browser, it's going to hide that change because any change we make in here in the browser outside of Cursor, because this is not a part of Cursor, it's just Chrome. If you refresh, it won't save your changes. This is just for quickly diagnosing things. So, okay. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and actually focus on the header portion, or putting the nav bar into our project. Now, before we go back to Figma for that process, I'm going to go ahead and add a folder. So you add a folder by clicking the new folder button, and I'll just call this assets. This is where we're going to store the logo and any other SVG based icons and stuff like that. And we can see we have the nav bar right up here. We can move it around And one of the important parts about this process is we want to make sure we left click and drag this in and make sure that the nav bar is, right aligned and it's flexible, it's fluid, right? So that's how we want it to behave in the browser. So you can kind of imagine you're mimicking what a person with a browser might be doing. Because the browser size might be here, it might be here. If it gets smaller than this, like a phone, we're gonna have to collapse that into a hamburger icon. And I'll show you that process as well to make it mobile. But we wanna make sure that this is set up correctly for this part. Okay, but before we get to that, we wanna take anything that's based on an image-based asset. That could be a photograph, like a JPEG or a PNG. It could be a icon, which could be in the form of PNG or SVG ideally. SVG is scalable vector graphics, and that essentially is not rastered, meaning it's never going to look blurry. You can make this thing as large as you want, and it will never get blurry. That is the case of our logo because that's what we designed in the previous video. So if I double click into here, notice it's called logo. Okay, well, we want to name our layers when we export them because it makes that's the automatic name it will name that file, if that makes sense. Here's what I mean. So if I take both of these, or there's just this one logo layer, come over here to export, and then I specify SVG for the type and hit export logo, then we are going to come and real quickly, then we'll see right here we have form fit, assets, and notice logo.svg. So it gets that name from the layer name over here. Personally, I want to use lowercase, so I'm just going to put an lowercase l, hit save. All right, so now if you were to go back, by the way, to your cursor, you'll see in assets logo.svg. We can click on it, and there it is. That is our transparent background. Okay. So that's another thing to understand about SVGs. They have transparency worked in. Okay, so now that we have that, what we can do is we can right click on this and click on copy link to selection. Now what does that do? Well, if we go back to our I said Visual Studio Code. That's a code editor I used to use years ago. Anyways, cursor, if we go back to cursor and we come over here and we paste that in, you could see it's an actual link to Figma. And this is the one way that you can use Figma MCP server, which I'll talk about in a second, in order to translate your layout from Figma to cursor to HTML and CSS essentially here in the browser. So what this requires though is you have to set this up first. So what you do in the chat bar, again, Control L to get this out, right up here, we click on Agent Settings. Then you click on Tools in MCP. Now, you can see this says exceeding total tools limit. Unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't remember the fact that I've toggled most of these off. It will just toggle them all because there's a certain amount of memory that these take up. And if you have this many like me, you don't want that type of situation. So I'm going to go ahead and disable Chrome DevTools. I'm going to disable Figma localhost. We're going to leave this one here, and I'll talk about what that is in a second because that's what you're going to need. GitHub I don't need. All these things I don't need. Let me keep going down here. I don't need render, shad cn, stripe. Again, just don't need a lot of these. Now you can see that the little message went away about exceeding tool limit. But right here is Figma, and this is the Figma MCP server. And it uses that link that we just pasted in order to accurately attempt to translate all that information into HTML and CSS. So there is a document at figma.com that helps you figure out how you set this up and add it to cursor. But real quickly, if you just go over here, let's see here, add new MCP server at the very bottom. Actually, I don't want to click this because it's going to reveal sensitive API keys associated with many of these services. But that's how you set it up there, and just use the Figma help document that I'm going to remember to link here in the description that shows you exactly how to add the Figma MCP server. It's free. It's just a matter of setting it once and then forgetting, and also making sure that it's not erroring out like how you saw some of them were erroring. So as long as it's toggled on and it says these tools are available, you're good to go to be able to use the Figma MCP server. Okay, before we send this and we tell it what to do though, there's one step that is absolutely crucial that will determine the chances of this working out, the first shot. And so what that is it becomes entirely unnecessary, or useless rather, to use a Figma MCP server if you're not utilizing and you're not adhering to certain fundamentals and best practices. So we're selecting this frame right here. We can just call this, let's call this Navbar. And it's a good idea when you're using the Figma MCP server method that I'm about to show you to name your layers. And the reason is because that is passed along into the context window of cursor based on whichever coding model you're using. For us, we're using Claude Opus 4.5. And that's how the MCP server works. It's sending a bunch of data. One of the pieces of data happens to be the layer names. And the layer names is something that gives it a clue as to what it's working with. Here's nav, and then it says frame 1, 2, 3, 4. These don't really matter so much. It's not a big deal that they're named this, but as long as we got the logo, the nav bar, and the nav, that provides extra context. But there's also more context that gets passed along outside of just layers. We also have all this stuff over here. And one thing that's real important is that you utilize styles and variables for colors as well as spacing. Here is what I mean by that. Right now, like for instance, if we're looking at, we say we have the nav bar selected right here, right? And we're looking at the spacing in between these links right here, right? Well, notice how it says 46. Well, if we adjust this number, it's going to be closer or smaller or whatever. We're going to leave it at 46, but here's the problem. This is not going to be passed in and of itself because we want to apply a variable to it. So if I click apply variable and then go ahead and click plus here, so we're adding this 46 to a new variable name, or we might already have a design system variable set up that matches. For instance, you could see 48. Well, this is a variable called 1200 and it's already set at a value of 48. Pretty close to 46. But so you can use this one without creating a new variable, or we can just specify, our own number or value for that. I'm just going to go ahead and use 1200. Now notice, now it's wrapped in like this darker background color. And so that's to let you know that that is a variable and it gets passed along. I don't include anything that's 0. I don't make those variables like in these values right here, which is vertical padding and horizontal padding. But what else do we have? We have color in here, don't we? Yes. Well, the color is already baked into the SVG logo that we created, so we don't have to worry about that. But the color here, if I double click and then double click into that one more time, you'll see it says selection colors. Now this is outlined in purple, which means, remember, if you followed along in the design of this is a component. So really, we want to find a component instance of that, the main component right here, which is up all the way over here. And we want to double click into this, and then we have access to the actual fill color of the type. And then this is where we want to go ahead and click this right here, and then click plus, and then it's a variable. So we're creating a variable. We'll just call this navlinks, create variable. There we go. So now that will also be passed into context with the topography. Notice where it says navlinks right here. That's what we just created. Now additionally, we have other things though, because topography has multiple things outside of just color. We also have, right here where it says topography, we can apply styles which will basically store the fact that this is 18 pixels for the font size. It's bold. It has a typography or a font of man rope, all this stuff. So we click this, hit plus, and then we're going to say nav type, create style. Okay, so now all that important information will get passed into the MCP server as well. Okay, so outside of that, what else could we possibly consider ourselves with? Well, above it, we have a certain amount of white space, right? So if I click on the nav bar itself, right? Well, oh, we're on the wrong one. Sorry. There we go. That was the original. So if we click on the nav bar itself, you'll see, and we hold Alt, it'll let us know how much distance exists from the top of this. Now, you can get real anal and try to pass along all that stuff as much as possible, but part of the MCP server process, when we send that first message over with that link, a part of it, what it does is it screenshots this entire thing. So it passes that along in the context payload as well. So it will be able to see through computer vision to a fair degree, where this header or this nav bar should be placed. So then we can make fine-tune adjustments thereafter in the in-cursor editor, which I'll show you as well. I'm sorry I'm talking a lot, but I want this to be, even though it's a crash course, I want this to be, something that beginners can understand. Okay, so now that we have all that stuff specified, we're gonna right-click. Oh, and by the way, before we do that, if we click here on the nav bar itself and we look at all these properties, it's a good idea to come over here and be like, okay, is there anything that needs to be converted to an actual variable or a style? And in this case, no. The width is set at 1,596 pixels, but really we want that to fill the container. But the problem is right now I don't have this set up to where it's a part of a container. It's not a part of a parent container. It's not a child container. So we'll direct it into the prompt itself, saying that we want this to span 100% width of that inner container that we created that has the max width of 1,600 pixels. Outside of that, that looks good. If we click on in this stuff, that looks good. We click here, all that's good. Yeah, I think we're ready to rock. So now we're going to right click. We're going to copy the link to these, or copy link to selection. There we go. We're going to minimize that, come back to cursor, and here we go. So I'm going to first paste this in. Okay, so here's how I said. Use the Figma MCP server to integrate this nav bar into our design. Be sure to place it inside of the inner container and ensure that it's fluid, 100% width. There's a logo, which you can find in assets, logo.svg for the logo. This is important to specify because it may not look for that, and a lot of times it'll make up its own logo. We're also using the man rope font, and again, it should know this by default. We maybe didn't have to include this, but I'm including it anyway, so be sure to include that as a font. So we're going to see what this does. By the end of this, it should have that nav bar at the top, similarly designed to what we have in Figma. Notice how it says nav bar hero section will go here. It's using the MCP server right here, get design context. Now let me get a screenshot. Remember I mentioned it gets a screenshot as well. And I have everything set to run everything, so it just runs through all this stuff. Now it's creating the CSS styling necessary to create all of this, and then the HTML. Okay, there we go. I guess we're ready to rock. Let's check it out in the browser. And there we go. Okay, now you might be wondering, what the heck? That kind of looks cool. There's like this cool gradient behind. Remember, that's based on the height of the container, which is going to be much higher than what it currently is. So what's cool is sometimes it will actually add its own hover effects, even though that was not in the original Figma design. And again, you can just tell it to remove hover effects if you don't want them. Now, here's a good question. See, here's how that you can visualize the max width thing occurring. Hit Control-Shift-I, and I'm going to make this a little bit larger. And then we choose this little selection icon, and then we click right here, and then we can see in the HTML hierarchy here, we have this hero content. Notice how it has the orange stripes on the left and right when I hover over it. That's to let you know that it is currently beyond 1600 pixels, but it's keeping that inner content like right there. Because otherwise, if we don't have that max width, what would happen, and you can actually do this yourself, if we click over here and then we get rid of this property, max width, we just toggle that off. Guess what? Now it's going to be a truly fluid design no matter what it is, no matter how large this is. I can make this span multiple monitors and it's always going to be from the very left and right. That can be kind of hard and jarring for people from a UX perspective to read, depending on how you set it up. Some people do have their, like marketing landing pages set up to be like this. Me personally, I want to have a little bit of a buffer on the left and right. So if I hit Control-Shift-I again, or we just refresh, we'll see how that works, the fact that it's staying in the center. So we have this white space here and over here. This did a perfect job, and that's because we properly utilized and set up our Figma document, basically with all the styles and variables and all that good stuff. Okay, what's next? Next up is going to be the hero section, the left column, which is where we have our headline, subheadline, or description. We have 2 call to action buttons, and then we have this little trust section down here with these people's pictures and then these icons. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to export the assets that are needed to make this work. Now, here's the thing. Many times, like if you're dealing with a project that's like a throwaway project and you don't care about the exact icons that are used, you don't have to export the icons. You can the AI and cursor will just use an icon that's very close that it has access to based on what it saw in the computer vision screenshot. But if you really want to have perfect control over exactly what's output, then you want to export these icons. So what I'll do first is if we gain access, we double click into here. You can see this says download. That's the name of this layer. We'll go ahead and export that as an SVG. And under assets, notice it's just called, I'm going to put an icon-download.svg. We're going to do the same thing here. This one's called video, export, once again, SVG, export, and I'm going to call this one icon-video.svg. Finally, we have the heart, that's called heart, SVG, export, and we're going to call this icon-heart.svg. Okay, that's all great. We also have these other assets right here. And these people, we can go ahead and export those as well. I'm going to rename those real quick to person 1. All right, there we go. Person 1 through 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to click on export. And then this time we can't use SVG because these are actual raster-based images. They're photographs. So that's incompatible. So we can use PNG or JPEG if we want for that, export 5 layers. And then now, because we have multiple selections, we don't get to specify the actual name. It's just going to revert to the name over here since we have multiple files. So I'm going to hit save. And now if we go back to cursor, in assets, we'll see person 1, 2, 3, and so on. Now notice, it actually worked in and baked in, it's kind of hard to tell, the stroke around this. This is typically not the way you would want to do it. The way you would really want to do it is because we used a plugin called Unsplash, you can click right here, view image on Unsplash if you just select one of these people. So when you click on that, it says loading Unsplash. This is actually the full image, and then I would just choose download free, choose the small version, and then use that as the asset. And then CSS will be able to crop it out into an actual circle, so to speak. So that's just a real quick side note. So now that we have all that stuff, the next step is auto layout. All right. In order for the AI to kind of get an understanding and try to match this up as closely as possible, we need to utilize auto layout. And auto layout's one of those things that just takes time and experience to use it. And this is a crash course, so you're gonna walk away like, ugh, it's kind of annoying, but you will get it eventually, because what auto layout essentially is it's a way for Figma to replicate the various layout systems that we have in the browser through CSS. You know, like the grid is one. That's a way to lay things out. It's called the CSS grid. And then there's also Flexbox, which is another way. They each have, you know, their own, I guess, advantages and disadvantages. For the most part, Flexbox is what's used for the most part. The grid will allow you to do things like set up interesting grids and stuff like that. They can be used interchangeably depending on, you know, what your use case is. But auto layout is kind of built for that purpose, to mimic what's happening in the browser. So what we're going to do is we need to figure out an intelligent way to have auto layout. Now, if you followed the previous video, we already added auto layout onto this button, these two buttons here. Because if you look over here, auto layout, you know, it's a horizontal auto layout where we have a line left and all this stuff specified, but we also have this over here as well, which is auto layout too. But we need to put all this stuff into auto layout. So the first thing I'll do, because if this were centered exactly, like evenly between, you know, equal white space from the top of this element to the bottom of this element right here, we could just take all three of these and put them into an auto layout by clicking this button. But I don't want that, because I don't want there to be perfectly even white space between these three elements. This is a UI design type of thing, a UX thing. I like to group things that in a way that makes sense. So we have a headline, subheadline. I want to move it up a little bit closer so that these two are semantically, I guess you could say, tied together. Headline, subheadline. And then a little bit more further down, so if I hit the rectangle, you don't have to follow along on this part. This is just to visualize the amount of white space from up here to here. Notice we have like, what, twice as much here? That's a UI design thing, and it's one of those things that you just develop over time, your eye for design, and it makes things look and read and flow better. So with that said, because we want to have different spacings between this element and this element versus this element and this element, we're going to group these two up into their own auto layout container as well. And what happens is that gets reflected in the HTML markup as well. So with those two selected, toggle auto layout. And it knows intelligently enough that these is vertical because these are two elements on top of each other. So now we can control the white space right here by dragging this up and down. Next up, with that still selected, we hold Shift or Control to select this element right here. Now we have to ask ourselves though, maybe we can take these two and put those into an auto layout as well. And then we can group these together in their own auto layout container too. So we can take these two, holding Shift, and we want to choose auto layout. Now it doesn't really appear anything has changed except we have the access to this part. And so when you drag these things in and out, you have to ask yourself, is the layout doing what you want it to do? For me, I don't want this element to be tied to the right side. I always want there to be a concrete fixed amount of white space between this heart and this last avatar. So I'll double click into that. And then what we can do over here in the settings is we don't want to fill the container. That's why it's behaving like that now. The width of it is going to be based on the width of the parent container. We're going to choose hug contents. There we go. So now we have this set up in such a way that no matter what the size of this is, it's not going to be affected by it. Now, if we double click over here for this auto layout, which is a child of this layout right here, we can go ahead and choose fill container. For width rather. There we go. Now it's still not working because this is kind of just stuck over there. So in this case, we double click into here. I'm going to select both of them and we're going to choose. The width was a hard-coded width of 218 pixels. That's why it wasn't responding to that. So we're going to choose fill container. Now it fills the container based on the width of what the container is, essentially. So very powerful stuff, and it is confusing at first if you're new to it, but don't let that deter you. You'll get a hang of it eventually when you do this enough times, as with anything. Okay, Finally, we have this layout, that auto layout. Let's select both of them and click right there. We're going to add an auto layout between them. And now we're going to move these around. Is it making sense in terms of like, how it will respond? Well, not really. Yes, the subheadline is responding, but this up here is not. If we go in, that should be collapsing on itself, and it's not. So we double click again, and notice it's because it has a hard-coded width value of 400 something pixels. Fill container. Now, nothing changed apparently, but that's because every won't fit right here. But if we were to take the parent container and do this, guess what? We set this baby up. Yeah, looking good right now. There's some other considerations that we'll tackle. Like for instance, if we get too small, then we want this watch video button to kind of like fall, beneath, get stacked on, beneath the get format button. But for now, this is actually pretty good. So I'm happy with the auto layout section. Now, what's the last thing that we need to do? Well, if we're using the Figma MCP server method, which there's multiple methods. I'm still harping on the MCP method. I'll show you another method here coming up when we do this part down here. Then the last step is to make sure we're utilizing variables and styles where necessary. And so we have to work our way through all of this in order to get it set up correctly. So we have nail your form, this is this whole column. Okay, so we're gonna start there. First thing I'm noticing, frame 16. No, we're gonna call this left column, or left call or something like that. Then inside of here we have the headline and subheadlines type. So we're going to say headline container. We'll leave, I don't bother changing the name of this stuff here. Down here is going to be CTA container for call to action. Inside of here we have CTA buttons. And I'm not going to worry about this one. We could rename this like to get form fit CTA, and then watch video CTA. Then finally we have trust container, and then we have avatar container, and then we have, I'll just put gym goers or something like that, and that's good. So now we got, that context is dealt with, the name, the layer names. Going back, if we select everything, now we're going to look over here. Okay, so we see there's a value of 71 right there. Okay, so let's go to apply variable. We're going to come down here. 64, that's fine. We'll just use that predefined variable. There's nothing else of note here. However, we do see a width that is hard-coded at 556 pixels. And that is something we don't want, because in order for this to be fluid in a web page, this should probably grow or expand depending on how we're setting it up. But because I don't have a parent frame container around it, an auto layout container around it, we can't make this fill the container. Notice fill container is not a thing here. It's just hug contents. Now you could set this up so that everything is in its own auto layout container the way you need it to, but I didn't set it up like that. So just understand that there's a lot of different ways to approach this. Me, I'm kind of picking parts and pieces and not trying to one-shot the entire layout, because trust me, that increases the degree to which you get an undesirable result. Okay, so next up, what do we have outside of that? Okay, so we have this container that houses the headline and subheadline, the headline container. Again, we have a value of 25 here. Okay, so I'm going to go over here. I'm going to choose 24. Everything else looks good in there. Okay, we're using fill. Yes, it has a 556, but notice it says fill. It's currently 556 pixels. That's why that exists. That's not the same thing as fixed width 556. Okay. This is also hug for height, which I like. The height of this container is always just going to be the height of the text inside of it. That's what that means. Next up, let's drill down into the actual headline type itself. Again, all this stuff needs to be passed in as context. So apply styles. I'm going to go ahead and choose plus here. We'll call headline text. That's fine. Create style. That all gets passed in as context, and then also the color, we need to pass that in too. Now, it may, based on computer vision, understand that this is pure white, but it may guess, it may make it off-white. So if you want to be specific, we're going to add over here, the libraries, where do you have one here? Nav links, yeah. So we can make that the same color as nav links as long as we're okay with those two being tied together. So I can just click on nav links for that. Right here, this text, same deal. We're going to hit plus. We're going to name this subheadline text, create it. And then also, we're going to come over here. We're going to hit plus. We're going to call this a variable. This will be subhead color. Create variable. There we go. So all that stuff is dealt with. Yay. What else? We have this section. We have 54 for the white space between them. So I'll just use 48. That'll be fine. And then also, let's just do a fill container on that. There we go. That's another thing that we wanted to change. We'll double click into here. Again, there's just a 9 amount of white space between them. So I'll just apply variable. We'll choose 8. Double click into the button itself. Again, we already have the icon that's exported, but we want to take a look at some other things. So we have 10 up here. We could just use 8 for that. And again, if you don't want to use this predefined, you want to be perfect, you create your own variables. Here's another one, corner radius. This should also be added as, an actual variable. So it gets passed in. The color, again, come over here. We're going to hit plus. We'll call this primary color. There we go. That works. What about the text? I know this is time consuming, but if you want to get it as perfect as possible, this is the process. So come over here. It says white. Okay, let's add white to that one. So once you start defining your variables, this process goes quicker typically. Like here's the typography. Click plus, CTA button. There's that style. We got that. Yay. I think everything else is good. This one over here, again, we're going to want to make this one use that same style, the CTA button. So that's going to use the same text here because it's the same over there. Outside of that, we click on this. That says 10. Again, we'll use the one that says 8 right there. 5, again, change that to 4 like the other one, and we're looking good. Finally, we have this over here. We have a 25, so we can use 24 for that spacing. Everything else looks good. Double click into this one. This has a 9 spacing, so we'll use 8. This over here, this is interesting. It has -18, and that's because these are overlapping on top of each other. So if we take that, we will definitely want to apply a variable and create one. We'll call this avatar spacing. The value is not 0, it's -18. There we go. That is now saved as a variable. Anything else to add? Nope. I think we're good. All right. All right, we're ready to rock. So now what I'll do is just take this left column container and I will right click, copy and paste as, copy link to selection. Now we're going to go back and we're going to go back to our index here. And here's the next step. We're going to paste that in and I'm going to create a prompt. Okay, here it is. So at the top I have it pasted up here. This is the left column of the hero section. I have included assets inside of the assets folder for the relevant icons and the user avatars. That's why naming those files is important because it's going to look and choose which ones to add. Also, place in a right column that is approximately 60% larger to the right of this new left column. Leave it empty as it will have a Rive graphic in the future. What that means, let's go back. So this woman right here with these designs and this little UI behind it, that is going to be a Rive graphic. Now, if you don't know what Rive is, I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's a way for us to create interactive graphics that are viewable in the browser and anywhere else, really. It opens up a lot of extra interesting possibilities. Yes, this probably could be recreated with CSS alone and HTML, but it's a lot easier doing this sort of thing that we're about to do in Rive. So what that means in terms of an HTML and CSS perspective is that this is just going to be, don't do this, I'm just going to show you. So we have our left column here that houses all that stuff. This is going to be a right column that houses her. So it's kind of like a 60-40 perspective here, or ratio. That's why I told it to just put in an empty container. We'll put in the Rive stuff once we have the Rive stuff. Okay, going back, last thing, the left column should consume about 40%, the right column 60%. Also adhere to all tokens and information from Figma. I probably didn't have to put that, I'm just anal. Let's go ahead and give this a shot and see what it does. Please work. All right, it is done. Let's check this out. Please work. I'm at localhost 5500. Okay, yeah, look at that. It's nearly perfect. One thing that we didn't communicate to it was the amount of white space, although that's pretty good. I probably want it a little bit further here on a large desktop, a little bit further down. But yeah, this is 60%. Now the way we know this is fluid, this left column, because remember we told it to make it 40% of the parent width. Well, remember the parent container over everything is a max width of 1600 pixels. So right now, even though this is a percentage base value, it's going to look like it's hard-coded at a certain pixel amount because its parent container is 1600 pixels. But if we drag this in, you'll see where it says, especially like right here, this text right here, it's going to start collapsing in once we get to a browser width that is less than 1600 pixels. So watch this. See that? Now at a certain point though, we're going to want to make this mobile responsive. Like this looks like crap. You would not want this like on a tablet because this is like a tablet size, this whole window. So we need to concern ourselves with that down the road. But for now, this is good. This is exactly what we want. Notice it did the little hover state background change, you know, that's fine. I'm not going to be anal about that. But it pretty much did a perfect job. It got the spacing right, colors right, typography right. We are rocking. Okay, so the next step is going to be, what if we wanted to make an adjustment to this after the fact, after it's already been built? Well, you have two different ways of doing this, and I'm going to show you both. So the first way is if we come out over here, notice where it says this option, connect to browser tab. Well, we're going to click that. And then it's going to say browser tab, off, Chrome, whatever. Well, the idea here is if we click on this little icon right here, open browser, and then we type in localhost 5500 at the top, now we have the cursor embedded browser here. Now, what's really cool about this is just similarly to how we have the Chrome DevTools, when we hit Control-Shift-I to open those up, and then we can use a selector, you have the same exact thing here. Right up here, you click on this little select element icon, and then it'll allow you to, specify, which element you want to observe or change or whatever. Well, I want to increase the white space a little bit from the top of this type to the bottom of this logo. So how would we do that? Well, we can see it looks like there's some space at the top here in section. So if I just left click that, it's going to bring this up. Again, very similar to, kind of similar to what the Chrome DevTools offer you, because up here we have the HTML hierarchy, or the document object model, the DOM as it's called sometimes. And then down here we have all the properties. Well, what's really cool about this though, unlike the Chrome DevTools, we have the ability, it kind of looks like Figma, like, with this part over here. That's why I said Figma has kind of like try to recreate what they've done in the browser, right, with their CSS. This is kind of the same concept, but there's a caveat here. If you try to make a change to any of this stuff, well, what happens is right down here, notice how it says section. Whenever you click on one of those elements, it adds this as context. So it passes in like the name of the div element that you want, like where it can find it, along with any properties that are associated like through CSS. So if you hover over it, it shows you all the stuff that gets passed in as context through here. Okay, so what happens though is if you want to commit those changes, then you have to actually send a prompt. So it actually costs money. But that's just to let you know, I use this sometimes, but not every time. So again, going back to the task at hand, how do we increase the white space between these two elements? Well, there's usually multiple ways to skin a cat. So if we click on like Navbar, for instance. Now, one thing that's annoying is that it starts adding all those, like I can get rid of that one now. If we click Navbar, well, we can probably add some margin bottom. That would be a way to increase the white space underneath it. So margin is down here. So notice we have margin top and bottom. See, margin top and then bottom 0, and then left and right here. What this does is add white space on the outside of an element, either top, bottom, left, or right. If you want specific access to all sides, you click that icon, and then right here is margin bottom. So if I zoom out and left click and drag, look at this. It's affecting that white space. So that's one way that you can achieve a change. Now, you click right here, apply. What that does is it just sends that information like as if you typed it down here in the prompt yourself, and it's going to have AI actually find where it needs to make that change, because otherwise if you don't do that, then it's just like the browser. Like you refresh, it loses, it doesn't make the change permanent. Okay. All right, hopefully I'm being thorough enough. Let me know in the comments if you're enjoying this so far, this type of flow or whatever. And definitely check out DesignCourse.com for way more content and educational stuff. Okay, shameless plug ended. Now that we have that and everything's looking pretty good, we're now going to shift gears into Rive land, all right? So we're going to change this up. We still have to come back to Cursor to do a bunch more work on the remaining bits of, the layout, but this is going to be a nice welcome change, a change of tune, because now we're getting into something entirely different, which is Rive. So let's do that. All right, unfortunately, my camera just died, even though I have it plugged in. I'll have to look at that. So you don't get to see my mug at this point in time. But anyways, let's talk about Rive real quickly. If you go to rive.app, this is where you can create a free account, and you can use Rive in the browser because they have an in-browser editor, or you can download a desktop app, which is what I use. So what's cool about Rive is essentially what it is it can be used for websites. It can be used for actual games like built in Unity. It can be used pretty much almost anywhere in car dashboards. And it's a way to create really cool animated and interactive user interfaces. And it's a tool that I've covered a lot. And I use it in almost every project, especially on landing pages, because you can do some real cool stuff with it that you can't really otherwise achieve through other means. Or if you did try to achieve it like through HTML and CSS alone, or in JavaScript, it would be a massive amount of work. Just understand that, yeah, there's a little bit of a learning curve to it, but it's really not that bad once you understand the basics, which is what we're going to cover by integrating our custom little animation. So I'm going to type in Rive, and this is going to open up Rive. I actually have an update that I need to install, but I'm not going to bother with that. So I'm going to go ahead and click New File. Now, the very first thing we need to know is what is the width and height of our image or our Rive graphic? Well, to answer that question, we're going to go back to Figma. And the way we can do this, there's multiple ways. What I could do is just hit rectangle R key, rectangle tool, and I'm going to left click and drag out a size that kind of just encapsulates everything. And so that is a width of 1033 by 580, roughly 1033 by 580. So I'm going to go back 1033 and 580. Hit create artboard. There we go. So like this actually has a very kind of like a similar design to Figma, right? Like you select something, there's properties over here in the property inspector. We have layers over here and assets and some tools up here. What we want to do first and foremost is You know, this has a background color by default, and we can toggle that background color off by selecting it. And then over here under fills and stroke, we can just go ahead and hit the eye icon. This means that we can have transparency behind it. And that is exactly how we're going to export this file for use on the web page, but I'm going to toggle it into view temporarily while I'm designing, because I don't like to see that checker background when I'm trying to like design stuff. So that means we're going to try to get the color first from Figma. We could use the gradient and put that in. It's not that big of a deal. So I'm just going to get the one, you know, this color back here, 191A20, and I'm going to click over here, paste that in. There we go. So now when we go to export this, we're just going to toggle that off. But for now, we're leaving it on like this. Now, we also have bad color contrast between, you know, the canvas here and this area. It makes it hard to see where the edge is. So if I click on design background, we can change the color. So if we just grab this and then maybe use something lighter right there, that works. So now we can clearly see where our edges are and where we're working. Okay. The first thing that I want to get onto, you know, here is the asset of the woman who is working out. This is really not a plank, by the way. This is more like the upward portion of a push-up. If this was a plank, her elbows would be down like that, but never mind that. Anyhow, what we want to first do is export her alone. And she is, if you paid attention with the first video when we designed this, she is a transparent PNG in digital form. So what we do is, in order to select her, we have that group 2 is hit as locked. So now I've unlocked it. And now I can move stuff around, but it's all part of her group. So I can right click and just choose ungroup. Now I can grab her alone right there. Okay, so that will work. What I want to do is take her, hit export, PNG is correct, export image 1. Now, we don't want to put her into our website assets because she's going to exist within the Rive file itself, and the Rive file itself gets put into the assets. So we don't put her here, but we do need to save her somewhere on our computer so that we can then import her into the Rive, you know, software. So I'm just going to go to desktop. I'm just going to put female. And then I'm going to go over to Rive, and I'm going to go ahead and get my browser up here. It's on the other side of my monitor, so you can't see it, my file browser. But all I'm going to do is left click and drag her from that file on top of here. Now, here in a second, you'll see it. There she is. She's a little bit too large. We want to scale this down, holding Shift and Alt. And now she's part of the assets. So you can see her right here. It says female right there. Hierarchy. Go back there. Here's our layer stack. Okay, so the size, you know, we want to match this up as closely as possible to Figma. So she doesn't go almost just about all the way. So it'd probably be like right around here. And another thing that we want to do is, if you recall, we did also specify some of these right here, these radial gradients to simulate the fact that, you know, she has like a shadow that's being cast, and we did multiple of them. So what we can do is we can recreate this, and we do want to recreate this instead of exporting this as like a PNG. If we recreate it with the tools within Rive, then it's going to have a much, oh, I didn't realize there's a black circle there. I'm sorry about that. This black circle that's like hovering right there. Let me get rid of that real quick. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So now what we want to do is we want to take this information right there. This is going to give us the background color information for the gradient that we recreate. So I'm copying that color code. We're going back to Rive, and we're going to create an ellipse. So over here, the ellipse tool, just hit O, letter O on your keyboard, hold Shift. All right. And right over here, we can create radial. We're going to move this one to the center. we're going to paste in the value for that color stop, which is there. And then we're going to paste in the same value color stop right here, but make it 0% opacity. And then now I'm going to drag this down. Notice, oh, we want it to be darker, by the way, for that center one. So let's select this and just make it darker. All right, and now you can kind of see it's being cut off from the sides, which is okay, we'll fix that. And we want to make sure it goes underneath. So I'm going to come out here, see up here in our layers, drag it underneath her. By the way, we can lock her, by the way, so we don't select her by accident. All right, and then if we come back here to our gradient, you'll see there's kind of no way for us to flatten the gradient really. And that's kind of frustrating. So there's a workaround, and that is to use feathering. So if you click add feathering, what it's going to do is it's going to blur the entire layer, and you can change the blur amount, based on what you need. But now it's like a softer type of color here, and then we can go back and select the second one, make that one a little bit darker too. There we go. So now we have, hit OK up there. That, we're going to duplicate it and create another one that might be even larger. Shift Alt, scale up. Maybe adjust this value to make it larger like this. You can kind of see it. It's very subtle. And then maybe duplicate that one over here. But I don't want anything spilling off the edges. We don't want to have clipping occurring. So that's why I don't want that to occur. So there we go. That's perfect. We've recreated her. And again, when we select this artboard and we hide real quickly this is what will actually get exported. All right. Good right there so far. Next up, we have those little blue circles. All right. And what we're going to do with the blue circles is we're going to kind of create like a little component, like a separate frame, and then import that component because it's going to have its own looping animation, each one of these, where they pulsate. And so because there's 5 of them, we only want to have to do that once. So going back, let's go ahead and create those. Oh, by the way, let's just grab that blue color code right here. Right there. There it is. It is 1F80FF. All right, so hit O, letter O. Hold Shift Alt, create a circle roughly around that size. Now what I'm going to do is if we take this off and we click up here, the artboard tool, think of this as like the frame tool in Figma, and we just create a size maybe like right around here. I'm going to copy this, just delete it, select it, and paste that in. Now, where is it at? We need to find it. So if we click it, X position, we'll just type in 0, 0. There we go. Okay, so now we see it again. I'm going to put this in the exact center. It has nice snapping here. We're going to paste in that color code, which I completely forgot because I overwrote it. There we go. Copy this. There we go. Okay, and then also there was another one behind it that's just kind of like darker. So we can get that information too. It's probably completely black with opacity. Oh, this was actually a stroke applied to it, which is fine. So black at 65%. All right, so we can go back. I'm going to duplicate that, Control D, and I'll put this one underneath it. And then this one we'll make larger, hold Shift, and then we're going to make it black at 65%. Okay. Now I'll probably make it start here, but for now I'm just going to leave it like this. We're going to give this artboard itself, which we can rename, by the way, by double clicking up here, and we're just going to call this dot or pulse or whatever you want to call it. And we're going to get rid of the background, so we hide it. Now, one thing I should have done is created a component out of this from start. So if I click this, create component, and then I'm going to take these two layers and simply just copy and paste them inside of here real quickly, get it up around the same size, and then hide that. That was my bad. I should have done that from the start. So now I'm just going to call this one dot. We're going to delete this one. There we go. So now if we take the component tool itself, just left click once and choose dot, there we go. So now we have this right here where we can start to copy that and put it into the various areas that made sense. So like right here, here, and then finally down here. I'm just hitting Control D to get those all ready and rocking. So let me show you something that's really cool. What we'll do is we'll select this dot artboard right here, and we're going to click on right up here, the Animate tab. Okay, this completely changes the UI, and we have this stuff down here now. That's the main difference. So essentially, we want to come over here. By default, you're giving a starting timeline. We click on timeline 1, and this brings a keyframe-based timeline up here. And let's say, for instance, we want to make this a looping animation where this outer ring keeps just pulsating out and just like dissipating over and over. So the way we do this is I'm going to take that black one, hold Shift and Alt, and we're going to make it start right there. So you can't even see it. So notice it put a keyframe there automatically. And if you expand this, you click on path, you expand that, it changed the width and height to 26 and by 26. So now maybe we'll have it go all the way out to the end, and then we're going to increase it like this. All right, so now watch what happens. Oh, there it is. I don't think I had it selected. That's why that was happening. Now, if I go ahead and hit play, that's all it does, because it's a one-shot type of animation. It means it only plays through the timeline once. If we hit loop, well, watch what happens now. Kind of lame, but it repeats. So what if we wanted to make that a little bit slower? Well, we come right here, playback speed, let's try 0.5. That's a little bit better. What if we wanted to add some easing? So we take all the keyframes, or if we just select it like this, we'll take this keyframe and that keyframe. We come over here under interpolation and we choose cubic. So this will allow us to grab these points right here and move them up and down to influence the rate of playback during this entire 0 frame to frame 60 or whatever it is. So let's try that. Notice how it starts off slow, then gets fast, then gets slow again. That's cool with me. How about we add opacity? So maybe right here in the middle, the opacity of this layer, right here, see this little kind of diamond? We click it. That adds a keyframe right there, opacity 100%. At the end, we'll add opacity of 0. Which means it should end up hiding. Although, why is it not hiding? Because perhaps we're placing this on the wrong element. Because I had it on the path. Let's see here. Let's try adding it on that element. So now we selected the parent element essentially. If I add opacity there and opacity there to 0, there we go. So sometimes you may have to apply these in other areas. So look at that. Oh yeah. Now here's the magic. If I go back, or I zoom out by holding Control and my mouse wheel, go back to design here, and then go back to animate. If I hit under the state machine, so this state machine is kind of like the brains that allow you to tie multiple artboards together and do cool conditional stuff. If I hit play, look at all of them. See how they're all kind of just emanating from that? That's why components are so powerful, because if you have multiple instances of something that does the same thing, then there you go. Okay, so we're not done yet. what we want to do now is focus on the next part, which is going to be the lines that connect between them. So again, if we go back to Figma, you'll see these lines right here. And these lines, if I double click into one, we'll see they're white, 37% opacity, and their thickness of 2. Again, we'll just real quickly recreate those in Rive. Going back, Rive has, let's see here, do they have a line tool? Well, they have a pen tool, same thing. So what I'll do is just left click from here to here. And then I will hit escape. And then I will double click onto it so that we have it selected. And what we want to do with this custom shape is select the actual custom shape itself up here and then make it white. And we also have to make it thicker. So we click over here. Fills and strokes. That's because this is a fill. Sorry. We click plus and choose stroke. There we go. All right. And in here, I'm going to make this 2 for the thickness and then click on this color and then we could choose 37. Oh wait, no, alpha is right here. There we go, 37%. There we go. So now we also want this to go underneath all of the dots. So I'm going to left click and drag that underneath. There's the first line. So I'll just call this line 1. Now we're going to go ahead and duplicate it. So duplicate, Control D. I will double click into it and then just move that anchor point there. Control D again. Get this around the center. Double click into it to get this anchor point here. Double click once again, Control D. Double click, this one goes up here, and then this one goes to the bottom. Okay, so now we have all of those. Now, unfortunately, these didn't get put into their own line, so we'll see how that affects animation, because what we want to do is create an entirely different timeline-based animation where these come in first, the dots, and then these lines grow in to connect them. I think that would be really cool. So to do that, we can come over here with our main artboard, go to Animate, and then under Timeline 1, we'll go ahead and create an animation around these. So if I take these 4, or 5 rather, hold Shift, and then change the opacity right there to 0. By default, they're hidden. Same thing with all these. I may have to end up going back. I think that's what we should do. Let's see if I can just pull these out. I don't think I can. Okay, so what I'll do is just delete the last 2, and we'll make sure that we're replicating the right thing this time. All right, so now I've recreated it with 4 lines, all having their own layers. And what we'll do is select all 4 of those. Once again, I will do a 0% opacity. All right, so now everything's hidden. And I'll say, let's do, we'll start off like around frame 5 down here. And we'll have the first dot, which is right there. If you just hover over and select, you'll see. And we'll put in a new keyframe right here at 0%, and then shift forward maybe by about, we'll go about 10 keyframes or so. And we're going to put in 100. All right, so now play it. Now we also don't want this to be looping. It's a one shot by default. Now what we can do is we can copy these keyframes, because the keyframes are only storing the opacity value. And we can come over here to 3, and maybe we'll offset that by, we'll start right there. So watch this. All right, so it just kind of creates this animation here. We'll do the same thing for dot 3. Oops, except move it over here. And then 5. Oh, wait. No, this is the next one. There we go. So let me see. 1, 2, 3. Up. Yep, this one gets moved here. And then the last one is actually .5. We could just move this so that it's all the way up here. Paste that in. So sequentially, they should look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, cool enough. Now, if we go back to State Machine and hit play, they will also have the animation where, you know, this animation that's embedded in the component is working as well. So that is, yeah, cool. If you wanted to, you could also make them scale. Each one of them would come from a 0 scale to 100%, and that way it looks like they're growing. Easily do that. And then finally, last thing we'll do is just kind of create an animation. Maybe we'll just fade in because I don't want this to be too long. You could make these actually grow. The lines would grow to each spot if you want. That would be extra cool. But for now, we're just going to do the opacity thing. So opacity is 0 already. We're going to put a keyframe there and then move forward by about 10 pixels again and make this 100%. So watch this. There we go. And then do the same thing for the rest. So the other line 2 is right there. Yep. And then 3. And then 4 finally. All right, let's check it out. Not the coolest thing you've ever seen, but it'll work for now. Maybe we could slow it down just a bit. So if we wanted to be slower again, 0.6. Maybe have some easing. I'll take all the keyframes, literally all of them right here. So left click. Now it looks better though when we actually have the pulsating files here. Not files, but assets. All right, so that's cool. Now the last thing that we had is this. All right, it's this little UI here. And yeah, that can be recreated as well. So if I lock this and we click on it, all it is a matter of a linear gradient on the inside of it with a stroke. And so we can grab all this stuff and just recreate it essentially. Or to make our life super easy, we could do a lot of cool stuff, by the way. We could make this grow, like in this progress bar, and the numbers change and grow from 0 to, it could be really cool. But for the purposes of brevity for this crash course, I don't want to get too crazy. So what I'll do is just take it, hit export, and we're just going to be a PNG, export UI, and we're going to save this as UI.png is fine. And then we're going to go back to Rive. I'm going to open up my file explorer, find that file. There we are. And then we're going to switch to design tab here first. And we're going to throw this in here. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to scale it down a bit. And we're going to put it behind. Although we could put it on top, that might be cool, but nah, let's just go ahead and keep it consistent. And we'll put it right there. And then with this artboard selected, we're going to go to animate. And what we could do is create another timeline. And I'll show you how this works. So that's timeline 1. Create a timeline, timeline 2. You can double click and rename these. So I'll just call this form. And maybe this one can slowly animate up and fade in. All right, so we'll start right here. Actually, no. We'll move forward first, maybe to like at the end. Put a keyframe. Notice all these are keyframeable properties. So Y could be here. That's position Y. I don't want to do a scale or a rotation or anything like that. So this will work fine. And then I also want to put 100% for the opacity. So we have 2 keyframes there. And now, coming back to the very beginning, we're going to pull this down. And that changes the Y-axis just a little bit. And then make it 0. Finally, we'll take both of those keyframes and let's see, maybe it starts off fast. All right, so now if we go back to state machine 1, now watch what happens. We hit play, we don't see that animation. That's because we have to add a new layer, and then we drag in form, and then we tie entry to form. Now watch. What if we wanted to, there to be a delay before it starts? So we could come over here to form, and what we could do is simply drag this over to like the middle. Now we can go back, hit play. It's still coming in a little bit too fast. So instead, I could take this animation, the duration, we can increase right here. Let's just change this to 2. So now this is going to be 2 seconds long. And then now we can just move this over here somewhere. Go back to state machine 1, hit the space bar, and there we go. Kind of comes in fast, so you might want to play with this, the easing. You know, you can try pulling this down like this. Let's see what that does. Yeah, I don't like that either. I think what we can do is just have a nice regular type of easing, ease in and out. Perfect. Okay, that is it. That's going to be our Rive graphic. So now what we do is we go back to Design tab. We take our artboard. We hide the fill. All right. And then we go to Export. We choose Export for runtime. And I'm going to put this into form fit assets. And we'll call this hero.riv. That's all we need to do. Now, we're going to switch gears back to cursor. And now we're going to tell it, all right, in the right column, Rive container, place assets hero.riv inside of it and ensure that you're using the correct Rive runtime as we're utilizing feathering. This right here just comes with experience. There's different Rive runtimes. We wanted to use the WebGL2, I think it's called. And make the Rive file expand to 100% width of its parent container. We don't want it to be fixed width or anything like that. So it's going to go inside of here. So we're going to go ahead and hit send and hope to God it works. Okay, so it's done, but notice if I refresh, we don't see anything. Why is that? All right, well, Control-Shift-I. It says reference error, Rive is not defined at so-and-so and so. And so it looks like there is a coding issue, but what you would do if that happens, if there's an error, it's like, oh, it didn't work, what the hell? You could tell it to use the in-browser editor here to verify. And remember, this is connected to the browser tab. I can say the Rive graphic is not showing up and there's an error. Fix this and verify your work in the browser. Now, I am going to provide it with some information because oftentimes what will happen is it needs to know the name of the state machine 1. Like you want to be able to tell it to use state machine 1 on the artboard called artboard. All right, so I'm going to pass it along that information as well. The name is state machine 1 on an artboard called artboard. Let's send it. At this point, it's launching its own server. It didn't know that I already had done that, so it's going to go through and get this working. There it is. It finally fixed it. There were some issues occurring with the Rive import, the package import. So obviously it's working now. It verified it by taking a screenshot and could see something's in there and there's no more errors. So, okay, what I'll do now is we want to look at this in the browser. And so let's get rid of this. All right, so here It looks like she could probably be pushed down a little bit further and made even potentially larger. So what I'll do is Control-Shift-I. Let's grab and see how this is working. So it is the height. Okay, so it is filling out the entire container, and that's good. To make it a little bit larger, you know, we could adjust this value just to see real quick where it says 60%. That's where that is controlled. So if we go to like 65, that's a little better. 70. So I think maybe 65 would be best. And let's take a look how close these are. Okay, so there is a little bit of white space here, that purple spot. So we could tell it to get rid of that 48 pixel gap. That gets her closer over that way. Okay, so with those changes, that's a lot better right there. And if I drag it in, at a certain point, like right around here, we would want to have her collapse perhaps to underneath or even on top of this stuff. All right, so right there, I think that's going to be good to stop right there. So what I'll tell it to do is increase the width of the right container to 67% and get rid of the 48 pixel gap between both of the right and left column. Again, you could find all this stuff in the actual CSS in the index.html file and adjust it yourself and save yourself some tokens. But if you're lazy, you can do it this way too. So now it's going to make those adjustments for us. And again, I could have made those adjustments right here as well. Probably would have made more sense to do that. But here in a second, we're going to have what we want. All right. Awesome. Okay, so for the next step, we have these 3 cards right here. 1, 2, 3, 3 columns. And this time, I'm actually going to do something different. I am not going to utilize the Figma MCP server. I'm going to show you an entirely different way, a different approach of recreating designs. So the first step is the same as the previous one, though. We need to export these assets. So we have speedometer, we have person simple run, and then we have medical. I'm going to export those 3 with selected as SVGs, export 3 layers, and I need to go back to my code folder. Here is form fit, assets, save. All right. So now that we have that, what we want to do is take our own screenshot, all right? And that screenshot's going to be just basically from here to here. Okay. Now that we have the screenshot, we're going to go back over to cursor, not Rive, but cursor. And by the way, before we continue, if I expand this far enough, you'll see it reveals this little context thing right here. The context, you don't want this to get up to like 100%. If you have a new thing that you're working on, a new feature, a new layout element, typically it makes most sense to come up here, hit new chat so that you have fresh context to work with. Think of it as, like the more the memory gets filled, that context window, the less accurate and predictable the AI is. So it's always nice to start fresh. So what I'll do is Control V and paste that screenshot in. And what we're really doing is kind of the manual legwork of what the Figma MCP server does. But we're just going to type all this information in ourselves in order to achieve that 3-column layout. So it's going to require more typing, but it's less work in Figma, so pick your poison essentially. So I'm going to type this all out, and you'll see that we'll probably get a really good result, just as good as the Figma MCP server result. Okay, so I just spent the time writing this all out. I'm going to quickly go over it. Integrate this 3-column design underneath the hero section in index.html. It starts off with a horizontal 1-pixel stroke that is this color code. And that's essentially, if I go back, that's describing what's happening right here, this line right here. And by the way, it says card stroke, so all I did just to get that real quick was just unlink it and then copy it and then Control Z to undo. Then we have inside of it is 3 columns, each repeating the same pattern of an icon to the left, then a title and description to the right of it. So icon 1, 2, 3, this is what I renamed them. The icon sizes are 30 by 30 pixels. The titles are white, man rope bold 28. The descriptions are right here. This color, man rope regular 16 pixels with 151% line height. There is a vertical 1 pixel border that divides cards 1 and 2 and cards 2 and 3. It's a 1 pixel gradient that starts off with color right there and at the top, and it fades to opacity 0 with this color code. And again, just to go back, that shows you it's this thing right here that fades from here and then off in the distance. So let's go back. And then ensure that there's good white space around the icons and the text as shown in the screenshot. Now, I could have been real specific and told it what to use, but we'll see what it does itself and then make adjustments thereafter if needed. So let's go ahead and send that over. All right, here we are. Looks good from that view, but let's go back here and refresh. There we go. This is pretty solid. I'd like it to be a little bit higher. Let's see what it looks like when we scale this in. Nice, perfect. Exactly what we would want. Of course, it's not responsive here. Obviously, this breaks pretty quickly, but we can fix that. There we go. I don't even have to make any changes. That's exactly what I wanted. Awesome. Now, let's go ahead and switch focus to the other portion, which is going to be the scrolling trust symbol logos underneath it. Okay, so all I did is if I double click into here and to get to this first one, I renamed, there's only 4 logos and then they repeat. So it's these 4, Google, Definitive Health, Hinge, and then Cigna. If I take all 4 of those, hit export, we want to choose for this SVG. I'm hoping that these are all SVG files. We'll find out if not a big deal. Export layers. And I'm just going to hit save. We're going to go back. And we'll see in assets, we should have Cigna, Definitive, Google, and Hinge. Okay, so now what we can do is, again, we don't need to use the MCP server for this because this is going to be dead simple. We just have to describe what we want here. All right, so create a horizontal scrolling marquee that repeats the following logos and assets, these 4 right here. Add 150 pixels between each logo and repeat them so that it fills out the container going from the viewport left to right. Viewport is just a fancy way of saying the browser, the visible area in the browser. So 100%, do not include it inside of a max width container. This should repeat and loop seamlessly with no jumps. Place this underneath the 3 cards in index.html. Let's go ahead and send that. All right, check it out. It's actually still working, but it's working here in the browser at least. I wanted to go the opposite direction and maybe slow it down by like 30%. The animation, and slow it down by 30% of its current value. All right, not bad. It kind of looks still a little bit fast, but yeah, we're good. And also like the Google Fitbit, that's cut off a little bit. So again, what I would do is just screenshot this and then paste that in. Google is cut off. Make sure the full logo is visible. Okay, so I told it you're overcomplicating it. All you need to do is increase the width of the Google logo specifically, and it almost got it right. And in this case, it's still cutting off the G. So just click here. It's going to show you, let's see here. Where did it keep all? Right here. This is the one we want. We got to find it. Unfortunately, it's not taking me directly to that specific one. I'll do a search, Control F, Marquee, logo, Google, 140. Let's try 150. Now, if we save it, go back, because it should hot reload, guess what? We can see the full logo. Okay. So another thing that's annoying me is that white space. It's a little bit much. So let's go back over here. Let's get this open. We can see it says a height. Maybe we fit content. Doesn't seem to really change anything too much. So there could be something else that's kind of pushing this down. And again, we'll verify that by going over here to see if it actually made a noticeable difference. Doesn't look like it did. So what else could we do? All right, well, let's take a look at the inner structure by hovering over this stuff right here. So we have this. Interesting. So it is coming from there. So what I'll do is select this overall container. Ah, it's this. It's that value, the padding bottom. If we reduce that, there we go. Right around there. Hit apply. Now if we come up, momentarily this will refresh when it makes the update. It's going to move it up. There we go. Look at that. Now this is looking pretty solid. It'd be kind of cool to have her fade in as well. We could go back to Rive and make that adjustment later. Okay, so we're really making good progress here. Let's continue on with the final section down here. Okay, so here's the final section. We're going to take this woman right here, which is a transparent graphic that we created before. We're going to export PNG. I called her girl sitting for the layer. And yep, girl sitting.png, hit save. And then also, this is this logo way up here, except really made larger. So we're going to export that as well. I'll call this large logo, large hyphen logo. Export that as an SVG. Save it. Then we are going to go ahead and create a screenshot. Go back and paste that in. All right. Underneath the scrolling logo marquee, design this next section. This entire section is contained within a max width of 1600 pixels. Again, I'm specifying that because I don't want her to go in this text to go all the way outside of the content. So the 1600 pixels content container is going to be right here. Then I specified the very first layer is a centered horizontally and vertically an SVG element called large logo. It's a watermark, but it should be large. Make it fluid, meaning responsive, not a fixed width, about 50% of the parent container. Now, where I got that from is if I go here and I grab this logo, well, I just imagine if I put it to the left, and this is 1600 pixels roughly, then this is about 50% of that width. So that's how I'm communicating that. And then it should also be position absolute with a low Z index, as the next asset will be sitting on top centered. What that means is a position absolute element in CSS allows things to be layered on top of each other like this. Otherwise, you run into a box model like with Flexbox and Grid where things don't get to be laid on top of each other typically. So position absolute means just a div element or an image element or whatever element that has that position absolute CSS property applied to it. It just means that you can stack things and move it wherever you want. So she too will be a position absolute element sitting on top of this background here. Although she wouldn't have to be. There'd be multiple ways of doing this, like having a 3 columns here, column 1 here, 2 and 3. That would be a way, but I told it to do something a little bit different than that. I said the next asset, the girl sitting.png, will be centered as well with a fluid width of about 20%. Be sure to maintain aspect ratio. She too will be position absolute as well. And then next, create a regular div element that houses the 2 content blips to the left and right. The title and descriptions are the exact same stylings as the titles and descriptions in the 3 columns above the section. And the left column has the type right aligned, and the right column has the type left aligned. So that's going to be the prompt. We're going to see how this does. Hopefully it nails it, but it probably won't. I think we'll have to do a little bit of follow-up work. And let's see. Okay, so it actually did a pretty good job, but we don't see the logo. And is that because I gave it the wrong name, large-logo.svg? I think that's what I specified. So what we can do is a little bit of sleuth work, figuring out what the heck, where it went. So looking over here, we have this image. This is the watermark. And looking at this, actually, I might be able to do a better job if I just do it this way. So Control-Shift-I, we're going to hover over the watermark, and it does show it. Okay, so this could be a Z-index issue. Let's change that z-index value right there from 1 to 2. Still not, oh, opacity, oh, that's why. I told it to make it a watermark, so it added opacity of 0.08 onto it. That's not what we want. All we have to do, we don't even have to prompt this. I mean, we can just go to, oh, right there, opacity 8. But what would be easier, just go to index, find 8%, control F, or 8 right there. There it is. Get rid of that, save it, go back, refresh this. There we go. Okay, now let's go back to the browser window, localhost 3000, and then we'll check out if it behaves how we want. Yeah, perfect. Now there is a lot of white space here, but again, this is the area in the time now where let's say you designed everything you want to design. All right, so now it becomes a matter of responsive design. You know, if we drag this in, at what point do we want things to change in terms of the layout? So this is where it becomes real important to understand, you know, what your options are essentially. A lot of people will come out to Figma and they will specifically design. So if we take this, something for like a tablet, you know, moving things around. So for instance, if I were to take, well, all this stuff right here, let's just hide that for a second or lock it. Let me take her, group all that stuff up, move her out. Oh, she's been locked. Let's go ahead and put her in there. Okay. Move this all out. And what we would do is I'd probably start systematically. Just delete all this stuff. Bring this in, perhaps like right around there. All right. And so now it becomes, okay, so if I just real quickly ungroup this, ungroup these, or I didn't even have to do that. Typically you want to leave your stuff around like this. Then you can be like, okay, we can make this specific adjustment and we can communicate all this stuff. We don't have to go through the process of doing the MCP server and all that stuff. You can generally just do a good job of describing the changes that you want to the rows and columns, and it will do a pretty good job. So I'm going to come up with the first one. I'm going to create a new chat, and we'll try to make this responsive. Okay, so here's what I did. I said at 1260 pixel and lower viewports, modify the hero section so that the Rive column is above the left column, nail your form every time, and make sure that both the left and right columns are now 100% width of their parent container. What that means and how I got 1260 is I took the Chrome Dev Tools and I was moving it in. You can see right there, it tells you what the width is and the height of the current viewport in real time. And so I think when we get to a level of like right around, I don't know, like here or so, 1260 or so, that's when we should move her above everything and then make both the left and right column extend out all the way. So let's see if it actually does that. And we could probably start to switch to something a little faster like Grok code because it is faster and we're not asking it to do really complex stuff. There we go. Take a look at that. That's not too bad. What I would probably have it do now at this point is to center this text and put a max width on the container because these buttons are real freaking big. So what I will say is, so at 1260 pixels and lower, center the left column hero text and also put a max width of 70% on the container that holds the two CTA buttons. Wait 1 second, and center that as well. All right, so now let's just switch to Grok code. This will be a lot faster. And then we'll go back. Refresh. Notice how it did that. We can also probably ask it to put a max width of like 70% on this text as well because it's kind of floating out there too much. We want to center this stuff as well. Okay, so those are the other two adjustments. So for the description in the hero section, max width 70%, and also center the user avatars, the 5 circular images, and then place the little heart text icon underneath the avatar centered as well. There we go. But it didn't center this text. It centered, justified the text, but the text itself is not centered in the viewport. So what I'll do is just take a screenshot. So make sure the center description text is centered itself in the viewport. You can see it's offset to the left. The model does not support images. Let me go back to Opus 4.5. I forgot about that. All right, there we go. Nice. So we have the full version here. That has worked out nice. Everything's good now up until we get to right about here. Anything less than this, we want to get a mobile hamburger menu icon, as he called them. Let's see what's happening down underneath, though. So this would be a little bit too squashed. What we would want to do is tell it to collapse these 3 columns into 3 rows that go on top of each other. So at what point should we ask it to do that? So if I hit Control-Shift-I, we drag the browser, we get the values up here. I'll say right around 1052. All right, so I asked it to do that real quickly. Now these should end up collapsing. There we go. Did a good job. We could, to keep it consistent, I would probably reduce the white space for sure around these areas. So again, like if I refresh this, there we go. We can see, if we select on these, we can see that there's padding that's affecting the top and bottom. So I would probably take this padding, reduce it. Let's see here. Let's take this one. We'll get all 4 corners. The bottom will get reduced to 36. We'll take 36, apply that here, and apply it here as well. That's better. Yeah, that works. Let's hit apply. Now if I refresh, there we go. Not too bad. And then we can scale this in, see what that looks like. Another thing I want to fix is the amount of white space between these 2 sections, a little bit too much. So we have padding here on the top of 120. I'm going to take that down to 0. I think that's better for sure. All right, let's go ahead and send that. That's better. So now we've reduced that. Now we get to a point though, right around here, where we would want to transition this to a mobile navigation with a side drawer that pulls out that shows these as well. And we could design for that in Figma and give it a design reference, but you can also just ask it to design it for you and see what it comes up with. So what I would say is right here at around 830 pixels, the following prompt. At around 830 pixels and less, transform the desktop navbar menu to a collapsed menu with a white menu icon that is left, I should say right aligned. There we go. And then when a user presses on it, there should be a slide out animation from the right that shows the 4 nav links in a vertical style. It's pretty vague, so chances are what it comes up with is not going to look that great and polished as the rest of the design, but you can iteratively work with it when we get to that point. So let's refresh. Oh, it hasn't added it yet. Let's refresh. There it is. Click on it. I don't think it's done yet. Let me refresh again. Look at that. It even has a really cool menu and look at that. Look at that. Look at that. And there you go. So that's your very quick mobile. Now I would probably change this just a little bit, but yeah, for the most part, that's good. Now notice here we have an issue. When we get to smaller ones, we're going to have to make a determination of, okay, what's going to happen now, like a smaller viewport like on phone, because this is completely unusable down here. So first thing, we could see that this showcase container, you know, how would we want to make this adjusted so that these two elements aren't crushing and sitting on top of her? Really, we would want these two to be two different rows on top of each other. Perhaps, yeah, two different rows, kind of like what we're doing here, and have it show up underneath. So what I'd say is right here, I'm going to copy that for a reference. I would say it should probably do that right around here at 920. All right, so at 920 pixels and less, at the bottom of the layout with the positioned absolute elements and the two content blips, transition the content blips so that they are beneath the woman sitting down in the watermark logo. As you can see from the screenshot, they're overlapping her. Ensure that you can clearly see the watermark / girl sitting, and then underneath the two content blips stacked on top of each other, designed similarly to how the three columns are stacked. Let's go ahead and see if it can do a good job with that request. Okay, and there we go. It actually did a pretty good job. I think I would probably want to keep them left aligned, but for now, that's actually pretty good. So look at that. And that's how you do it, my friends. Let's refresh. See this. This works. Desktop works. There's still some things that I would want to adjust about this, but yeah, this is solid for the most part. I probably want to bring these in so that they're overlapping this a little bit. But yeah, that's solid. The very last thing we're going to do, we've been working for a very long time now. I'm doing this all in one sitting, by the way. The very last thing I want to do is I want to show you some animation superpowers. Because there's some really cool things that you can do with something called GreenSock Animation Platform, which is basically a JavaScript-based animation library for animating UI elements, interactively too. You could do sequence animations, a lot of cool stuff. Some people opt to use that instead of Rive, although they're different things, but you can still achieve a lot of the same things with GreenSock as opposed to using Rive. So let's say, for instance, we want to have this stuff like animate in, or maybe instead of that, maybe when a user scrolls down, maybe we will make this logo graphic scale in from like 50% height to where it currently is as a person scrolling down. And then also maybe we'll make this left and right content blip right here. Maybe we'll push them inwards as a person is actively scrolling down. This is going to be fun. So let me show you what that prompt would look like. All right, integrate GreenSock Animation Platform, or GSAP. It'll know what I'm talking about. Create a scroll-based scrub animation. Scrub animation simply means it's a scroll-based animation. Like the animation is tied to your scroll distance. That does the following. Number one, when the very top of the watermark logo at the bottom of the design, that's in reference to the big logo, that's a watermark behind the girl, when it hits the bottom of the viewport, so what that means, just to illustrate this real quick, so here's the very top of it, right? So when it hits the bottom right there, at right here, we'll make it, let's go back, make the watermark grow from a scale of about 20% to its current value at 50% over the course of about 300 pixel scrolling. So it's going to start off small and kind of grow into its current shape over about a 300 pixel scroll distance, whatever that is. And then I asked it to move the left and right content blips that are featured to the left and right of the girl setting inward as a user scrolls down past that area. Move each of them inward by about 80 pixels. Okay, let's see if this will work. Let's go ahead and go back. All right, let's refresh, check it out. Ah, look at that. Okay,
So there's a couple things I don't like. First of all, I realized that this over here got screwed up from the responsive design section. We're going to tell it to right align this on desktop only. But scrolling down, because we're not using anything like a smooth scroll, it kind of gets jagged. It's like, it's hard. So I'm going to show you how you can kind of fix that and also get these to move in a little bit closer. So let's find that 80 pixel value first. We probably don't even need it. I think we can do control 80 pixels. No, that's not it. No. Well, I'll just tell it to move those content blimps in a little bit more. But I'm going to tell it to integrate, to fix these, the jagged scroll type thing, to integrate a smooth scroll library called Lennis. Okay, so integrate the smooth scroll library Lennis. Also make sure that the user avatar section and hero section is left aligned for desktop only. And additionally move the left and right content blips in more than 80 pixels, maybe try 140. Now watch what happens here with this smooth scroll library. We'll get a much smoother sort of animation. Now this is kind of a taboo thing. Some people absolutely hate when you integrate smooth scroll, but as long as it's kept to a minimum, I like it personally for a lot of different projects. All right, so let's check this out. Here's our animation up top. See how it smoothly kind of scrolls? It's like a locomotion scroll. Now, I think my computer's like, it's lagging a little bit. I don't think this has anything to do with just the performance because we're not asking it to do very much at all here. But yeah, this is the actual result. It didn't appear to really move these in enough. And again, we would have to really just kind of tinker around with a little bit more. Let's check this out. Let me open up yet another browser, Firefox, localhost 5500. See how much smoother that is? It was Chrome just being stupid, essentially. But that is basically it. Obviously, you can do so much more with all the technology that we have.
It's really cool how this industry has transformed because I've been doing this for 30 plus years. And I have to say, it's insane now, the level of productivity that we have. But clearly there is a learning curve to it, as you probably, like a lot of you might be just like, how can I redo this? There's so many steps or whatever. If that's the case, and that's completely natural, check out DesignCourse.com where I have several project-based courses that take you through the full product development experience. Like in this case, if we actually made the app, the tracker, then it would be like the courses that I have at DesignCourse.com. Also releasing sprint training, by the way, which is where, that's coming up very shortly, where you can work one-on-one with me over the course of 30 days, and I review your work through video, and you get like a 48-hour window to submit the next piece. Anyhow, that's enough spam. I will see you all very soon. Goodbye.